This is Profit from the Inside with Joel Block. Strategies to give your business the inside track. And now, here's your host, Joel Block.
The economy's changing, the winds are moving in a different direction, and businesses, rightly so, are concerned. So what should they be doing to position themselves for success in this uncertain economy? To discuss that, Meredith, Elliott, Powell. Meredith, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Hey, well, nice to have you. So what do you know about positioning companies for success in this economic uncertainty? Because we certainly are dealing with some of it more so every day.
Yeah, I feel like every single time I either talk with a business owner or talk with a sales professional or talking with audiences, everybody is really worried about uncertainty. Most people have come off a really strong 2018. And even though they've come out of the gate pretty strong in 2019, everybody's still waiting for the shoe to drop. And so whether the shoe drops or not, we've sort of laid it out there. So the question becomes, what do you need to do to deal with the reality that is uncertainty?
Right,
and this is about one of my favorite topics.
All right. So listen, before we talk about what to do, let's talk about what circumstances you see in the environment that companies and executives in those companies need to start being aware of and start paying attention to.
Well, I think the first thing, great question, by the way, the first thing they need to start paying attention to is everybody is waiting for some wizard or guru, in my opinion, to show up and tell them what the economy is going to do. And I think that all you have to do is watch the news for one day to see that you can flip back and forth with channels or go back and forth with podcasts. And on one, you'll hear it's up. On the next, you'll hear it's down. And pretty much that leads us to assume that nobody's really exactly sure. So I think the first thing that businesses and leaders need to do is just embrace that what made them successful in 2018 probably won't be enough to make them successful in 2019, just because we have laid the gauntlet out there of uncertainty.
And you're talking about the stock market, interest rates. What exactly are you referring to?
I'm talking about everything from stock market to interest rates to what's happening politically to what is happening from a competitive environment to what's happening globally. I mean, I think the news that came out with Apple this week is such a great example. Here's a company that we really put up there as, at the top of just having, unprecedented growth. And they come out with, less than stellar performance. And the reasons being is because the winds shifted on them. Carriers stopped subsidizing the purchase of telephones, and the Chinese economy, something they were betting on, slowed down. To tell people that the thing you need to pay attention to is, in my opinion, for one of the first times in history, we're living in a time where the majority of things that could impact your success are outside of your business and they're outside of your control.
Yeah, well, there's a lot that's outside. I was never surprised by this Apple thing. I've always thought that it really was overinflated to begin with, and that they really have been riding this tide excessively. People have been a little bit overly excited about it, which by itself creates a lot of uncertainty when you have this level of enthusiasm, and then people kind of start going a little bit cold.
Yeah, well, I mean, we definitely have been down that road before. I mean, just remember the dot-com bust. But the thing, either way, if the Apple was the second coming, or if it, did get a little bit hyped, just imagine where Apple would be today had they stopped, looked outside of the company, and really seen the fact that, their growth strategies were balanced on this idea that carriers subsidized phones and that the Chinese economy was going to continue to grow. Anybody could have told you those tides were going to change. And so if you're going to succeed in times of uncertainty, you need to be paying close attention to the things that are happening outside of your business.
Well, all of us know pretty much what is going to happen. We just don't know when. Timing is the
right.
one that none of us can predict. And so what you're saying is that we have to be aware of what's going to happen so that when it happens, we're ready, right?
Yeah. I think that, as business owners and as leaders, we need to be hyper-focused on our growth plans. We need to know what we want to accomplish, when we want to accomplish it. At the same time, we've got to be paying attention to the external forces that are going to require us to be flexible. I mean, let's talk about, election season when that comes back around. Depending on who takes the White House could definitely impact your ability to be successful. If gas prices go up or down in your marketplace, if a new competitor, if you work in an industry that Amazon's even looking at, things could change, could impact your ability to be successful. And I want to stress, they could impact it negatively or positively. If you see change coming, I think it could create opportunity. Put your head in the sand, I think it's going to be a negative.
When the current president took over about 2 years ago, stock market just exploded. I mean, almost the day after the election, the stock market exploded, had a lot of pent-up energy and started going up because there was a perception that there would be a lot of relaxation of regulation and things that had been putting the brakes on the economy. And that pretty much turned out to be true. So that was a real thing that really did impact the economy and impacted businesses, both the macro economy and the micro economy. So, you're absolutely right. I mean, for sure.
Yeah, it's, there is so much disruption happening. I mean, I was just working with a client in Washington, D.C., and they have a pretty big technology component of their business. And they're concerned about Amazon coming to town because they're concerned about, will they be able to hold on to employees? Will they be able to provide the services? At the same time, it creates a major opportunity because more technology talent will come to that area. They have some opportunity to get kind of creative with their flexibility and work-life balance, which is something I understand employees at Amazon don't generally have. So again, just that stress of uncertainty can have such a negative connotation, right? Because we're just bent to like to be able to control things and be certain about it. But as you and I have discussed, we're in major times of uncertainty. And from a business perspective, you've got to learn how to thrive in it.
The funny thing is that just asking the question, let's say that Amazon's going to come, what's going to happen if this, what's going to happen if that, just asking the question begins to solve the problem. And that's the great thing that companies need to do. They need to be asking hard questions. Hard questions are really at the core of the solution in every situation.
Absolutely. And I think it's not only asking the hard questions, but creating the space and the time to ask the questions, to realize that the shift of the leadership team isn't as much to work in the business, but to really be paying attention to the winds of change that are external and to be asking those questions. Because you're right, when you sit down with the team and you say, how's our world changing? How's our competitive environment changing? Just doing that starts to open the conversation, and opening the conversation brings about the new ideas that are kind of the mother of invention.
So what have you seen? Have you seen great companies that you work with or keynote for or whatever you do? And I know you do all those things. Do they leave time on every agenda to discuss hard questions, or does that happen at a retreat once every 6 months? Or what kind of formula or format do companies use to have those discussions so that they can get out of the tactical and get to the higher level and think once in a while?
Yeah, the method that I'm seeing that is really working the best, and I know this really intimately because I'm working on a book that highlights companies. So I've been spending a lot of time with companies that seem adverse to some of the risks that the rest of us suffer from. And one of as it comes to creating that time to strategize about what's happening externally to the business, it's reserved for a quarterly brainstorming session, which I think is smart because I think change happens. I think once a year would definitely be too little, and I'm not really sure 6 months would be enough. So spending that time at least quarterly, and that allows them to not only have that conversation about what's happening, but also reflect on their results.
That's a pretty good rhythm. So this would be outside the context of a normal day-to-day tactical meeting? I mean, the people typically go to a special environment where they just focus on these issues, or is it part of a bigger discussion, and it's just like they kind of wall off a little time for strategic planning, or how do they do it?
Well, yeah, I see companies do it a variety of different ways, and I think every single way is acceptable. I've got a company right now that I work with that they do nothing more than take 30 minutes of a traditional board meeting on a quarterly basis and just ask everybody to think about it before they come in, so that all the time that they have is for discussion. I've got another company that I work with that they really devote a full day to it, to really talk about the things that are happening in their industry, with their competitors, politically, society in general, and then weave that back into their fluid strategic plan. So I think that just getting started with the process, if 30 minutes is all you've got, that's better than nothing. The thing I do know is that at first it may seem cumbersome, but it produces such a different level of flexible strategic thinking that it would be something that you and your team, board, whomever, look used to. And, and if there are people on this, listeners who run smaller businesses who think, who would I talk to? This is a great thing to do with your peers. I worked it into a mastermind that I've got. I think it's something important for us to focus on, because you want to be ahead of the changes happening, not only in your industry, but you also want to be ahead of the changes that are happening with your customers.
A mastermind is such a brilliant thing. And actually, that's a great place for a company leader to get a lot of those hard questions, because those kinds of groups tend to do a great job of dealing with hard questions, because none of them are dealing with anything tactical, because they don't have tactical things to do as a group. So all they think about are strategic initiatives and issues that they all can then apply to their own situation. So being part of that kind of group really probably would help you to develop the hard questions, which you then can bring back to your team. And again, in my experience, the second you ask a hard question, your brain and your team starts working on overdrive to get the answers.
Yeah, and I think that it's, I think it's so important that whether it's with your team or it's with a mastermind, that you force it to be strategic at the strategic level, because I don't know what it is about. I don't know if we're designed this way, but we tend to focus on what we're currently doing or the past. And we don't spend enough time focusing on the future. And I think for most of our professional lives, we've gotten away with that because, change, we used to do strategic plans every 5-7 years. You had a longer life before disruption would truly happen. And now you don't. And so the more time that you can devote to really being at that higher strategic level, it's something that, don't be surprised if you show up and you've sort of got to pull people to go that way with you.
It is shocking. One of the most shocking things to me is how fast the world is moving these days. Even 20, 25 years ago, you'd write a little business plan, you'd organize something, you'd roll something out. It would take a year or two, maybe 3. Now, a lot of these people, they're rolling out brand new apps in like a week. And the creation cycle, the conversion cycle is so fast that it's frightening. It really is hard to keep up. And large companies that have large infrastructures that they have to mobilize really are at a disadvantage when it comes to being creative. And of course, that's why they have to buy little companies because they can't build it inside. I mean, they just can't.
Right. I've been doing a lot of work around the innovation of strategic planning, and one of the things I've been reading and studying about addresses this problem, like you're talking about with these larger companies, and what they're starting to do is scenario strategic planning. Is to they build the strategic plan, but within it they build scenarios of 2 or 3 things that they believe could possibly happen. Externally to the company in the next 2 to 3 years. Will they see a new competitor? Will the customer buying process be different? Whatever. And that forces them to have like plan A, B, and C. Now, it doesn't mean that they'll actually implement A, B, and C, but just by discussing scenarios and having different plans, it keeps you more fluid and able to flex if you need to be able to do that. And I thought that was an interesting way for larger companies to try to get themselves to be nimble, because it is difficult the bigger you are. However, if you can't flex and you're big, the downside of that is just going to be huge.
You know, I'd like to talk about some of the questions that you've seen companies ask. I mean, one of the things that I always find, somebody will say something and I'll say, and what's the impact of that? And then they'll say, and I'll say, okay, what's the impact of doing that? And then they'll say, and by asking the same question over and over, it kind of helps you reach a logical conclusion. It may not be perfectly right, but it helps me to make predictions. I'll even think that to myself frequently. So I'll think about something and I'll think, okay, what's the impact of that? And then, you kind of go on and on, because a lot of times, like these chess players that think 10 moves ahead, it's very hard for us to think a couple moves ahead. So we'll just blurt something out and then be done. But the truth is that by asking a little question like that, it kind of at least has helped me kind of think down the road a little bit. What are some of the great questions you've seen people ask?
Yeah, I just finished working with a company that they ended up making the decision to make some transformations around leadership, given how they saw society and their customers changing. And so the question literally on the table, the conversation began of what changes do we see happening in society? Well, they certainly talked about the fact that, we've got this influx of, huge generation of millennials. That led to the fact that a lot more young women were going into colleges, like something, they dominated a lot of the professions that were typically, male dominated. That transferred into what is the impact of that going to be from money, from earning, from buying power, from wealth? What is our customer going to look like going forward? Well, if more of our customers are going to be women, what are women going to want? What are they going to design? Do we reflect that? Would we be attractive to the female buyer? And we just went down an entire, conversation like that. And what it basically led to was a strategic plan that said they need to dramatically change the makeup of their top level and executive level leaders to be more reflective of the customer they want to attract in the next 5 to 10 years.
Listen, that really proves that asking hard questions produces good answers. I mean, that's just the nature of how we work as human beings. And one of the things that I notice is that hard questions are not really hard. It's not like, people think, well, give me a hard math problem. I mean, we're not talking about like Harvard level PhD mathematics. I mean, we're talking about something, the hardest questions in business are the most simple. Like, who are our customers probably going to be? I mean,
right.
I mean, there isn't a fifth grader in America that couldn't understand the question. But right. Answering that question is hard. And so that's, we have to really frame questions in a very simple way to produce really, really good answers for ourselves.
Yeah, I think what makes the questions difficult is that they force us to deal with reality. And the reality is, when you take your head out of your business, you'll just see that a lot on the outside is really changing. The interesting thing to me about this company that I was just discussing is that I go to conference after conference where everybody is talking about the transfer of wealth going into the hands of millennials and going into the hands of women. Over and over and over, you find it on all the investment magazines and everything. But I haven't seen a company really taking the bull by the horns and making the change. And that is, when you ask the hard questions, it forces you to look at the hard reality, which gives you the opportunity to get out in front of your competition and get out in front of change that you see coming. The funny thing to me about uncertainty is that we're all like, we don't know what's going to happen. Well, if you stop, you take a breath, and you spend some time talking, you said it beautifully at the top of this interview. We kind of all know what's happening. We just don't know exactly when.
Yep. That's kind of the that's kind of the bottom line, is that We all pretty much know what, but not when. So, you know, what do you think are why aren't companies taking the kind of actions that you just described? So they know that women and millennials are coming along. They know there's this transfer. Why aren't they taking the right kind of actions?
I think it's because it's kind of like, we all go to the doctor and the doctor says if we can, we continue to drink beer and eat corn dogs, we're going to have a heart attack. And we shake our head yes, and we know that's probably going to happen. And we go back out the door and we, eat corn dogs and drink beer. I think it's because in order to make those types of changes, it forces people and companies to get out of their comfort zone, and nothing's on fire right now. So, I just spoke for a company that just had an unbelievable 2018, and what the CEO wanted me to come in and talk about was the fact that he's got to wake his team up to do things differently in 2019. That's a hard sell when you've just had a really, really good year. And so, we tend to not make change until it's painful. So what I'd like people to understand, and what my platform is, and what I'm passionate about, is helping you make change while there's so much opportunity in the marketplace. Because you're going to change. It's just a matter of it's when you decide or the market decides.
I think Andrew Grove, the CEO of Intel, wrote a book, and he said it was something about being paranoid. I think Bill Gates was always paranoid too. These technology guys had a certain paranoia that somebody was going to be passing them at any moment, and they always operated with this paranoia. So they never got fat and lazy. They always were stayed nimble and fast to be able to change. And in a certain way, that's it. I mean, listen, eating the corn dog thing. Maybe in a certain way, we don't want to believe what's true, and so we just kind of rationalize that it's never going to happen or whatever we do. But in business and in health, by the way, I think you're right about that. There are realities, whether we like them or not, that are going to come to pass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, that's exactly right. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of what you're describing, that is exactly going to happen. So, all right. So let's say that there is economic uncertainty. Let's say that there's political uncertainty. There's trade, initiatives uncertainty. I mean, really what you're talking about is all of these issues need to be addressed through some strategic planning process every 3 or 4 months, where you're asking hard questions. What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? Who's going to be our customer? How's things going to change? That's really kind of a summary of what we're talking about here, right?
It's exactly. I'll give you kind of a mini example of this. I had a customer right when the last election in North Carolina happened, and they make a lot of their revenue is based on a tax incentive. What they sell is incented from a tax perspective for people to buy. And they're running along. I mean, they are just having one phenomenal year after another. And we started this process because I did some strategic planning for them. And the first go round, when we went through this process of asking the hard questions, was the very fact that when we looked at things economically and politically, there was a really good chance that Republicans were going to take back over in the state of North Carolina. And what did that mean? What would the impact be, to use your terminology? Well, the impact would be that, more than certain, these tax incentives were going to go away. Well, that was up to 70% of their revenue. So this was a good year and a half out. Best case scenario, they invented another product line that wasn't tax incentive based. Okay. Worst case scenario, that those tax incentives are taken away and they've got another revenue stream to make up for the revenue stream they just lost. And what happened was Republicans won. Their tax incentive was taken away, not as quickly as they thought, but they were ready and they came through it beautifully. So all those things that you're talking about should be talked about. All those situations you brought up should be in the forefront of discussions of leaders today. And they should be asking, what if? What would we do? How would we pivot? Where would we go? And then when it does happen, they have a plan. If it doesn't happen, then you still have a great plan and a second avenue to keep to keep moving forward.
I just love that even if it didn't work out, then they end up with a better plan. So if they plan and they end up not being injured by some political change, that they end up with a better plan than they had before.
Yeah. It is, I think the worst thing you can be is a victim, because while it's fun to complain, I mean, I'd love to get on here and talk politics with you and whine all day long about how horrible everybody is and all those things. But the problem is, when we finish the conversation, we'd still be in the same hole that we're in when we started. So I want to get people out of victim mode and back into a power mode. And this process is the way to get there. You got no control over what's going to happen out there, but you do have control over understanding what it is, what your strategy is to deal with it, and how to use it, how to leverage it as a way to truly propel you forward and give you competitive advantage.
And how you respond is entirely up to you. I mean, I just listen. This is, there are things that we all know, but because we know them doesn't mean that we do them. And we all know we need a plan. We all know we need to think. We all know we need to be on top of issues, but we don't always do it. And one of the other things, talk about asking these hard questions. One of the things a lot of times that happens in businesses is that they get very insular. And they don't really think about things that are happening outside of their own company. And of course, that's leadership's job, is really to look out off the bow of the ship and look forward and see what's going on and see what's about to happen and what's coming close. And that really is an important objective. They really have to be paying attention, and all the more reason for people to get in mastermind groups and be involved with other people who are outside of their company and get perspectives from other people who are able to bring interesting perspectives. So, well, listen, Meredith, thank you very much. This has been, an interesting conversation, a critical conversation, and thank you for sharing what you know.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, Joel.
Awesome. Well, listen, we'll post your contact info and your bio and some other things in the show notes, and people can get a hold of you. And I just appreciate having the opportunity to connect with you, and I appreciate having a professional relationship with you as well.
Great. Thanks, Joel.
Very well.
You've been listening to Profit from the Inside with Joel Block. Strategies to give your business the inside track. For more insights and to learn more, visit joelblock.com.
How about a shout out and a giant thanks to my podcast producer, David Wolf, and his team at Podcast and Radio Networks. Profit from the Inside simply wouldn't be what it is without David and his team. For more information or to learn how you can launch and produce your own podcast, reach out to podcastandradio.com.